Hey there, and welcome to the kind of night you won't soon forget, unless the ale is really strong, in which case remembering might be optional. Picture this. The air outside is thick with fog and the promise of secrets, and you, my friend, are about to step into the wild, wondrous world of the medieval tavern. Tonight, I'm inviting you not just to visit, but to truly inhabit the heart and soul of the era's most boisterous, baffling, and bizarre establishment. And let me whisper a little secret. By the end of this journey, you'll discover exactly why the tavern keeper isn't just serving drinks, but orchestrating an entire universe of chaos, gossip, and survival. If you find yourself grinning, or just a little more curious about the strangeness of history, go ahead and like and subscribe, but only if you're genuinely into this. And do me a favor, tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from and what time it is. I love imagining this odd little gathering from every corner of the globe, like a bedtime story circle that spans centuries and continents. So, dim those lights, settle in under your coziest blanket, maybe let a fan hum in the background for that authentic medieval atmosphere. This is your invitation to loosen your grip on the modern world and step into a realm where history is alive, unpredictable, and just a little bit sticky underfoot. You're standing at the edge of a muddy lamplit street, the rain still pattering on the uneven cobblestones, making each step a gamble between progress and slipping straight into an impromptu mud bath. The air is a swirling blend of horse sweat, wood smoke, and the lingering memory of last week's stew. Your shoes, let's be generous and call them shoes, are so damp they squelch with every movement, and you swear you're developing webbed toes. Hunger gnaws at your belly, exhaustion drapes over your shoulders, and, just to keep things interesting, you've narrowly avoided being flattened by a cart overloaded with turnips twice. You crave shelter, company, and something that passes for a drink. But here's the twist. In this medieval town, finding a tavern isn't as simple as scanning for neon signs or scrolling through reviews from picky nobles. There are no illuminated directories, no helpful maps, and certainly no GPS, unless you count the ancient art of following your nose and your ears. Somewhere beyond the clang of the blacksmith's hammer and the fishmonger's enthusiastic yells about his slightly suspect eels, you sense it. A rising tide of laughter, shouts, and a surprisingly passionate song about a goose that, frankly, deserves its own ballad. You drift toward the commotion, letting the sounds guide you past, windows flickering with candlelight, and alleyways that smell like regret. At last you spot it, a crooked, sagging building, its wooden beams leaning together in a manner that suggests both drunkenness and architectural improvisation. Over the door hangs a battered wooden sign, painted so crudely it could be a barrel, a bear, or maybe the artistic collaboration of both. The sign swings in the breeze, creaking ominously, as if daring you to question its identity. This is the place, your portal into the underbelly of medieval social life. The entrance step is glossy with spilled ale, making every arrival a test of balance and dignity. As you reach for the heavy door, its iron hinges announce your presence with a groan, so theatrical it could easily upstage any bard inside. Warmth rushes out to greet you, thick with the aroma of smoke, damp wool, and that lingering, indefinable scent that might be mystery meat or just the ghosts of meals past. You step in and are instantly enveloped by a living, breathing tapestry of chaos. The ceiling is low enough to threaten your hat, and the walls are stained with the stories and stains of centuries. The floor isn't just dirty, it is, in fact, dirt, sprinkled with straw in a valiant but losing battle against mud, spilled drink, and the occasional unconscious patron. There's no hint of privacy, no menus, and certainly no quiet corners. The medieval tavern comes in two modes, uproarious or closed for fire damage. Welcome home. You scan the room and spot a bench near the hearth, looking invitingly empty except for a suspiciously wet patch. You decide not to investigate what caused it. Nearby, a heated debate about a missing chicken is underway, while a man snoozes with a ladle clutched like a teddy bear. Under a table, a one-eyed dog gnaws a bone, radiating the air of someone with an overdue rent payment. And this, believe it or not, is just the foyer of your evening's adventure. The mingled sense, part ale, part anticipation, part what is that? Promise a night, either memorable or best left unmentioned. As the tavern door thuds shut behind you, the darkness embraces you like an old, somewhat disreputable friend. The air is thick, humid, and tinged with suspicion. Candlelight flickers along the soot-streaked walls, turning the shadows into sinister dancers. The hearth in the far corner blazes with a fire that's equal parts warmth and threat, sending lazy smoke rings swirling toward a chimney that may or may not be hosting a retired crow. But none of that prepares you for the onslaught of scent awaiting your first real breath. A medieval tavern's aroma isn't so much a smell as a rite of passage. The dominant note is ale, worn, sour, and apparently applied liberally to every surface, including the furniture and, by the looks of it, the regulars. Underneath, a robust bouquet of sweat, some human, some animal, and some possibly mythical, mingles with the sharp tang of mouldy bread, the earthy reek of wet straw, and a drifting suggestion of recently boiled onions. It's a blend that would drive a modern perfumer to tears, or perhaps to a new profession. Every table is a monument to mischief, carved with initials, crude sketches, and the scars of countless knife games gone wrong. The benches creak in protest under the collective weight of heavy cloaks, muddy boots, and questionable decisions. Straw on the floor has long since given up any hope of cleanliness, now serving to soak up whatever disaster lands its way, human or otherwise. Every step is a gamble. One moment your foot is on solid ground, the next it's sinking into something with the consistency of dreams best left unexamined. The crowd itself is a single, ever-shifting organism. Roars of laughter erupt from the far side, while two men debate the going rate for a pig, with such intensity you'd think the fate of the kingdom depended on it. A woman slams her mug on the table, sending a tidal wave of froth in all directions, and nobody even blinks. The man beside you fixes you with a gaze so vacant, you wonder if he's pondering the mysteries of the universe, or simply how to operate a bench. Someone sneezes, and an entire quadrant of the tavern leans away as one. A silent choreography of self-preservation. Yet, for all the sensory battering, there's something warm and strangely welcoming here. The tavern breathes, pulses, and roars with life. A medieval community center, with more shouting and considerably less personal space. You find your seat damp and possibly cursed, but for now, it's yours. The tavern's layout is best described as enthusiastic improvisation. There's no sign of a plan, just a scatter of tables, benches, barrels, and the occasional crate pressed into service as seating. Everything is spaced either too close or suspiciously far, depending entirely on the occupant's level of sobriety. The hearth is the sole anchor, its fire drawing people like moths with mugs. Those lucky enough to snag prime seats by the fire guard their territory with the vigilance of dragons. Everyone else relies on ale for warmth and possibly courage. The bar, if you can apply such a term, is little more than a hefty wooden plank balanced across a pair of barrels, sagging under the combined burden of mugs, jugs, and elbows. Behind this makeshift counter stands the true master of ceremonies, the tavern keeper, a figure whose mere presence shapes the entire experience. There are no menus here. If you're feeling bold, you can ask what's available, but prepare yourself. The response is likely to be a gruff, allez, or patience. A rickety staircase, its steps worn smooth and splintery by generations of uncertain feet, leads up to a shadowy second floor. Peer closely, and you might spot a solitary boot dangling from a railing post. No one's quite sure if it's a warning, a trophy, or simply lost and forgotten. Some taverns boast a mysterious back room, rumored to house anything from illicit dice games to the remains of last week's troublemaker. Best not to inquire too deeply. The walls are a canvas of candle soot, the windows covered with greasy cloth or animal hide, filtering out the outside world and trapping in the aroma of centuries. Every surface has been polished by elbows, boots, and the occasional chicken, each layer adding to the patina of stories embedded in the grain. Against all odds, the chaos works. Everyone here seems to instinctively know when to sit, when to shout, when to duck, and, most importantly, when to refill their mug. Now, in this swirling maelstrom of humanity and spilled drink, there stands a ruler. This isn't the local lord or the tax collector. No, the real power here is the tavern keeper. They might not wear a crown, but their authority is absolute. Imagine someone part chef, part accountant, part bouncer, and part judge, all wrapped up in an apron that's seen more stains than the floorboards. The tavern keeper is the glue binding this unruly mosaic together, and they have zero tolerance for nonsense. If the tavern keeper is a man, he's likely built on a foundation of stubbornness and sausage, with arms thick enough to double as battering rams, and a face weathered by years of smoke and sarcasm. If it's a woman, and it often is, she's sharper than a tailor's needle, with eyes that can silence the noisiest corner, and a wit that slices through bravado like a hot knife through butter. Either way, they've seen everything, heard worse, and cleaned out problems, bodily and otherwise, before most people have finished breakfast. Regulars are greeted with a knowing nod, strangers with a measured gaze, and troublemakers with a tankard that sometimes lands closer to the head than the table. The tavern keeper keeps mental tabs on every customer, who's paid, who owes, and who's already 3 mugs past their limit. All of this is managed without a scrap of parchment, because while literacy may be rare, the tavern keeper's memory is legendary, even terrifying. The mood of the tavern rises and falls with the keeper's temperament. If they're smiling, the energy crackles from wall to wall. If they're scowling, it's wise to drink quickly and save your best jokes for another night. They're the referee in every dispute, the judge in every cheating scandal, and the first to reach for a club when a brawl erupts. Ignore their authority at your peril. But the keeper's power isn't just about muscle. They're the town's unofficial oracle. Who's in debt? Who's sneaking around after dark? Who just arrived from somewhere they'd rather not discuss? If you need information, you offer a generous tip. If you need protection, pick a seat close to the bar. If you need a favor, you'd better hope your tab is paid and your manners are impeccable. Some tavern keepers command a small army, or more realistically, a single overworked assistant. This could be a son, daughter, spouse, or an orphan plucked from the gutter, and now expected to haul barrels twice their size. These helpers dash between tables, mop up disasters, and attempt to avoid being trampled by inebriated patrons. Their job is exhausting, their pay meager, but their endurance nothing short of heroic. So, beneath the apparent chaos, the medieval tavern is a finely tuned ecosystem. At its center, like a storm god in a stained apron, stands the tavern keeper, the one person ensuring the ale flows, the roof stays put, and the riot never quite boils over. The tavern keeper isn't just a host. They're the architect of every roaring night and every whispered secret. Trust me, you're in their world now, and you do well to play by their rules. And as you slide onto your slightly damp, definitely lopsided bench, heart pounding with anticipation, you realize you're only at the beginning. The true flavor of the tavern, its food, its drink, its wild, unpredictable cast of characters, awaits you. The night is still young, the stew is still questionable, and the adventures of this rowdy den are just getting started. So you finally settle in, dodging elbows and spilled stew. You wedge yourself onto a rickety wooden bench, sliding in between the elbow of a burly stranger and a puddle of what might once have been soup or ale, or something more mysterious. Your throat is parched, your boots are soaked clear through, and the promise of drink hovers in the air, like the faint, slightly sour aroma of old onions. Welcome to the Medieval Tavern's main event, the beverage selection, which is less of a menu and more of a challenge to your immune system. There's no glassware shining behind the counter, no sommelier in sight. The tavern keeper offers you options with the subtlety of a storm, each one a gamble, each one a test of courage, or at least of digestive fortitude. First up, the celebrated ale. Imagine a brew thick enough to chew, cloudy enough to hide its own secrets, and as unfiltered as the local gossip. It's crafted in the back room, which doubles as a kennel for the tavern dog, a dog that may or may not actually belong to the establishment. Your mug arrives, well worn, and possibly still containing part of last night's stew, and the ale within is flecked with bits of grain, clumps of yeast, and the occasional unidentifiable floater. The color is somewhere between muddy creek water and ambition. It's never cold, there's no ice to be found, and nobody's asking how long this barrel's been tapped. You take a cautious sip and hope for the best. Next in line is mead, the honey wine of legend. The word itself might conjure up visions of golden feasts and laughter, but medieval mead is a gamble in a cup. Sometimes it's sweet, sometimes it's as sharp as a bee's temper, and in rare moments it's both at once. If the tavern keeper brews it themselves, you might get a batch that tastes like wildflowers and sunshine, or one that tastes like regret, old socks, and a hint of stinger. This is the drink reserved for nobles, newlyweds, or the bard in the corner who claims mead as his birthright and only payment. There's also cider, made from apples that might have been hand-picked at dawn or scavenged from the dirt a month ago. The taste is unpredictable, sometimes crisp, often tart, occasionally with a suspicious hint of barnyard. It comes poured into a mug that might double as a soup bowl by daylight, with cracks that let the liquid breathe or leak, depending on your luck. In orchard-rich regions, cider is the drink of choice for those hoping to mask the fragrance of the man next to them, or simply to remember happier harvests. Wine exists here, technically. Unless you're lucky enough to be in southern Europe, or the local lord is in residence, the wine is usually sour, diluted, and accompanied by the dry wit of the innkeeper. The good stuff is reserved for the bishop, the merchant who just sold a cartload of salt, or that one noble who insists on refilling his goblet every minute. For everyone else, it's a glass of disappointment with a dash of sarcasm. Then there's water. Only the bold or the desperate choose water, because while it looks innocent, it's often brimming with invisible menace. Wells are suspect, and boiling is expensive. This is the real reason why even the smallest children drink ale. It's less about merriment, and more about dodging dysentery before reaching adulthood. No one's keeping track of servings or inventing cocktails. You drink from whatever is available, wooden cups, clay jugs, dented tin mugs. Sometimes you get a bonus flavor, courtesy of last week's stew. You raise your mug, inhale, and brace for whatever comes next. It's warm, it's bitter, and it somehow feels right. Because in the medieval tavern, if it's wet and doesn't immediately kill you, it counts as a luxury vintage. If you survive the drinks, congratulations. Your stomach now reminds you it's empty, with a growl that echoes the dog's snores. You haven't eaten since dawn, and your last meal was mostly barley and the faint taste of disappointment. But here, food is its own adventure. There's no menu, no cheerful waiter, and no one asking about your allergies. You simply ask what's left, and hope it's not just a rumor. The king of the medieval table is pottage, a thick, bubbling stew of grains, vegetables, and whatever protein the cook could coax, trap, or borrow from the barnyard. The pot has been simmering since the start of the week, and every day new ingredients join the party. but nothing ever leaves. It's less a meal and more a living, edible archive. If you spot meat, consider yourself lucky. It might be rabbit, pigeon, or the unfortunate chicken who wandered too close to the fire. Game meat is a lottery, sometimes tender, sometimes ancient, always flavored with a sense of urgency. Your bowl is made of wood or clay, and your spoon is either your own or your fingers. Most regulars carry their own knife, transforming dinner into a bring your own cutlery event. Napkins are the stuff of legend. Your sleeve will do. Or you can share the communal rag, which has seen more of life than most nights. Bread arrives, dense, dark, and sturdy enough to double as a weapon in a pinch. If it's soft, it was baked today. If it's hard, it's been lurking in the pantry since last week, gaining character. It pairs best with cheese that smells like ambition left too long in the sun, and is developing a personality of its own. Sometimes there's salted fish, sometimes pickled eggs, and occasionally a special dish, which usually means the cook had too much of something lying around. Flavor is optional. Texture is a wild card. Yet, in this flickering, firelit room, surrounded by noise and faces, the food is strangely satisfying. It's hot, it's filling, and if you don't overthink the floating bits, it might even be comforting. This isn't fine dining. This is survival cuisine, medieval style. Once you've secured your seat, ideally one that doesn't have a knife sticking out of it, you start to notice the true entertainment, the people. The medieval tavern is the original social network, loud, unruly, full of rumor and spectacle. Everyone's profile is public, privacy is a myth, and the only filter is the thickness of your skull. To your left, a red-faced farmer is deep into his fourth ale, retelling the saga of his cow's miraculous sideways birth. He slaps you heartily on the back, either welcoming you as a new friend or mistaking you for his favorite pig. At the far end, a figure in a hooded cloak nurses a drink in the shadows. Is he a runaway monk, a bandit, or simply someone allergic to eye contact? You decide not to find out. Near the hearth, a soldier in battered armor spins tales of battle, dragons, Frenchmen, and swords that talk back. Everyone knows none of it is true, but the tankard is full and the laughter flows as freely as the ale. A merchant, sweating through his tunic, shouts the day's grain prices to anyone who'll listen. He flashes his coin pouch with the desperate flair of a man who has never heard the phrase, "Don't tempt fate." A pair of locals hunch over a dice game at a warped table. One cheats with impressive subtlety, the other lets it happen, probably saving his outrage for when his drink runs dry. In the corner, a bard strums a lute that is bravely missing several strings, crooning a love song that sounds suspiciously like one he invented on the spot. No one minds. At least he's in tune, and wearing pants, already an improvement over last night's entertainment. Women move through the crowd, some serving, some seeking their own fortunes. They're sharp-eyed, quick with a smile or a retort, and entirely capable of breaking your nose if you cross them. Children dart beneath tables, scavenging leftover bread or the odd coin, slipping between legs like ghosts. No one stops them. It's simply part of the tavern's rhythm. Everywhere you look, someone is watching, plotting, laughing, or pretending to ignore the man quietly napping under the table. This isn't just a bar. It's a living, breathing theater, and tonight you're part of the cast. Forget about epic ballads for a moment. The real soundtrack of the tavern is not a song, but a riotous mix of sound. It begins with the clatter of mugs slamming onto tables, sometimes to celebrate, sometimes by accident. Occasionally, a mug shatters, prompting cheers and curses in equal measure. Laughter bursts out, deep, booming laughs that shake the walls, high-pitched snorts that ring above the din. Somewhere, a farmer guffaws about hay, a knight giggles over the word pottage, and a monk loses control every time someone mentions ducks. You quickly learn which topics to avoid. Voices overlap and compete, each one louder than the last, battling for dominance like rival roosters. Arguments about taxes, debates over saints, and at least one heated discussion about whether goats dream fill the air. The bartender shouts, orders above the fray, swatting flies with the energy of a man fighting a losing battle. A barmaid yells at an over-eager patron, while someone near the door keeps bellowing. Another round, like it's a sacred oath. In the corner, the bard plucks away, looping the same 4 chords, his lyrics drifting from tales of lost love to stories of chickens found in strange places. Occasionally, he improvises a verse about someone present, which is always either the highlight of the night or a prelude to disaster. Mishaps are inevitable. Someone spills their drink, someone else burps with enough force to rattle the ceiling beams. Inevitably, a patron topples off a bench, continuing his story from the floor, as if nothing happened. Dogs bark in the background. A goat bleats without explanation, because of course there's a goat. And chairs scrape across the dirt like thunder in a wooden canyon. There are rare moments when the room falls silent, not by design, but by accident. A collective pause that lasts just long enough for someone to break it with a legendary fart, at which point the laughter and music resume at full volume. This isn't just background noise. It's the heartbeat of the tavern, wild, unfiltered, and unashamedly alive. If you listen closely, it all starts to make a strange sort of sense, a harmony born from chaos, a rhythm that only grows more infectious the longer you stay. And as the night thickens, you realize you've become part of this tapestry. Not just a visitor, but a thread in the endless, noisy fabric of medieval life. So, as another round of ale makes its way to your table, and someone near the fire begins a story you're certain cannot possibly be true, you settle in. Because in this place, the ordinary becomes extraordinary, and every night is a new legend waiting to be told. And if you're lucky, you'll make it to morning with your boots, your coin pouch, and only the mildest of stomach regrets. But as the food disappears and the ale works its magic, something subtle shifts. The crowd leans in, the noise tilts from chaos to a different sort of energy. The real festivities are just beginning. Because once the ale starts flowing and the stew starts settling, the tavern transforms. As the ale finds its rhythm, and the stew settles like a contented cat in your stomach, the medieval tavern around you shifts. It's not just a spot to fill your belly anymore. It becomes a makeshift casino, minus the velvet ropes, plus about 3 times the shouting. Gambling is the night's true sport, and every soul is a competitor. From leathery old soldiers with stories etched on their faces, to barefoot boys clutching dice. They probably borrowed from an uncle, or, let's be honest, pinched from a distracted traveler. There's no dealer in sight, no one to call foul, no pit boss in a fancy hat, just a battered wooden table, some copper coins dulled by years of wishful thinking, and the universally understood truth that someone here is about to be very, very embarrassed. Dice are the staple. They're carved from bone or wood or whatever, someone found near the pigsty, and they thunder across the table like a miniature storm. Each roll is met with a flurry of cheers, groans, and more than a few pointed accusations of sorcery. No one actually trusts the dice, but everyone uses them anyway, perhaps because it's less about the roll and more about the ritual. Cards make an appearance too, if you're lucky enough to be in a town that's slightly more cultured, or at least pretends to be. The cards are thick, painted by hand, their faces faded and corners frayed, and there's always 1 or 2 missing that nobody dares mention. The rules? They shift like quicksand, depending on who's explaining them, and sometimes it seems like the whole game is invented on the spot. Maybe you're aiming for high numbers, or maybe you're matching symbols. Or maybe you're just making it up and seeing who blinks first. It's a bit like poker, if poker involved more slapping and the occasional slapstick collapse of a chair. Wagers run the gamut, There's money, of course, but also mugs, scraps of bread, and the occasional goat that seems wholly uninterested in being part of the proceedings. Someone, inevitably, bets their boots. Someone else bets their dignity. And, every so often, a particularly bold soul bets their own freedom for the night. Spoiler, he lost, and now he's sweeping out the stables. The regulars are a sly bunch. They shuffle faster than you can blink, roll their dice with the slow gravity of a man who's seen too many winters, and smile like they know something you don't. Cheating is a sport unto itself here. A hidden die slides from a weathered sleeve. A marked card flashes in the candlelight, or a mysterious cough erupts just when the luckiest player leans in for the kill. If you win big, tradition demands you buy a round, unless you'd rather risk getting mugged on the way out. If you lose, just smile, pretend it was all part of your plan, and slowly inch your chair toward the exit, maintaining an air of dignity that fools absolutely no one. Side games break out like wildflowers after a rainstorm. Arm wrestling, thumb wars, and the ever-popular contest, who can drink the most without toppling off their bench. The victor earns applause, a few pats on the back, and the glorious prize of not remembering any of it tomorrow. The loser gets a night under the table, and a headache that lingers like a bad bard's ballad. But even when the rules are as clear as mud, and the stakes are downright ridiculous, the energy is infectious. In the medieval tavern, luck is not just a game. It's a wager with your purse, your pride, and, if you're not careful, your pants. As the night stretches on and the warmth and humidity grow thick enough to slice, another kind of drama takes the stage. The tables hush, the fire pops, and a new performance begins. One spun from words, music, and the finest nonsense ale can buy. Welcome to Storytime, Medieval Edition. In the smoky corner, a bard sits up straighter. He's got a battered lute that's seen better centuries, strings squeaking like old boots, and a grin that says he's been thrown out of at least 3 taverns this week. He's missing a few teeth, but not a single drop of confidence. With a dramatic bow, he launches into a ballad about heartbreak and heroism, something involving a lovesick knight, a mermaid, and an unfortunate incident with a very deep lake. No one really believes him, but no one wants to miss a word. That's the magic. Truth is optional. But entertainment is everything. Around you, other voices join the chorus. These aren't trained minstrels, just regular patrons emboldened by ale and the knowledge that tomorrow's embarrassment is future legend. One man swears blind. He once wrestled a bear and lived to drink about it. Another claims he saw a witch transform a cow into a goat, though the goat strongly objects. A third insists he's related to Charlemagne, though only on his mother's cousin's side. Every story starts with, "You won't believe this, but..." And they're right. You won't. But you want to. Boasts become ballads, mishaps become myths, and the line between joke and epic tale blurs, until someone tells a joke so excruciatingly bad, it loops back around to being brilliant. A woman recites a poem she almost certainly borrowed from a monk's best scroll, and the listeners respond with cheers, applause, or the occasional airborne roll, depending on the quality and the quantity of the performance. If fortune smiles, a professional scold or minstrel might wander through, drawn by the promise of coins, food, and maybe, just maybe, a warm spot by the fire. Their songs are polished, their tales so long you could roast a boar in the time it takes to finish, and their knack for stirring up the crowd is positively dangerous. Still, even they know the cardinal rule: never, ever let the facts get in the way of a good story. In this smoky, firelit room, storytelling is more than entertainment. It's glue. It's tradition. It's how friendships are forged, rivalries are born, and drinking partners are found for life. By midnight, half the tavern is stumbling through a reenactment of the one-legged knight who bested 6 highwaymen using nothing but a soup ladle and a stubborn streak. You laugh, you cheer, and before you know it, you forget it's all make-believe, because here, every liar becomes a legend if the story's got enough heart. But as the night deepens and the mugs keep being refilled, you sense a shift. There's a new energy in the air, the kind of tipsy boldness that signals the arrival of medieval romance. The bard is halfway through his 3rd song about love gone wrong when the room suddenly feels charged. Welcome to the medieval art of flirting. Subtlety left the building hours ago, and what's left is far more entertaining. It all begins with eye contact, or more accurately, one eye squinting through a haze of mead and candle smoke. A man with exactly 2 teeth leans across a bench and slurs, "My lady, your beauty burns brighter than the hearth." His would-be beloved responds by expertly launching a bread crust at his forehead. The crowd roars. Other hopefuls try their luck with a little more gentleness, offering refilled mugs, clumsy compliments, or gallant offers to help carry a bowl of stew up the stairs so it doesn't spill. Spoiler alert, it still spills. And now the dog, who might actually be a stray or perhaps is the tavern's unofficial pet, is eating better than you are. If you're a woman here, whether staff, guest, or merchant, you're used to fending off at least 3 enthusiastic poets, 2 aspiring arm wrestlers, and 1 man who believes balancing a knife on his nose is the key to your heart. Sometimes, against all odds, it works. More often, it ends with a black eye or an empty coin purse. For those actually seeking companionship, the tavern offers more than just a chance to flirt. Courtesans move through the crowd with practiced ease, knowing exactly who has coin, who has charm, and who's likely to pass out before making it to the stairs. Their transactions are discreet, but the whispers are anything but. Jealous lovers lurk in the shadows. Nothing sparks a tavern brawl faster than a stray glance, a wandering hand, or a spouse caught laughing a little too loudly at the bard's joke about bishops and their secret hobbies. Tables are overturned, mugs become makeshift weapons, and someone inevitably breaks the same bench for the 3rd time this week. Yet somehow, in the midst of all this wild, noisy chaos, true sparks sometimes fly. The baker's daughter and a wandering stonemason share a bowl of stew and a laugh over spilled ale. 2 farmers, united by their mutual disdain for turnips, find common ground and maybe a little friendship. A monk accidentally flirts with a nun, much to the delight of the entire tavern. Love, or something that passes for it after 5 mugs of mead, finds a way even in the rowdiest corner. In the medieval tavern, romance is a dice roll of charm, luck, and not face-planting into your soup halfway through a heartfelt sentence. You might win a heart, or you might earn a slap. Either way, it's a night you'll remember, or at the very least, one you'll hear all about in the morning. As the embers glow low and the last tales drift into laughter, you realize the tavern has become a tapestry of luck, legend, and longing. Even as the night grows late, the echoes of dice, stories, and stolen glances linger in the smoky air, promising that history's heart beats loudest in these overlooked corners. And now, as you settle a little deeper on your bench, perhaps dodging a wayward loaf, or the snoring of a man who lost everything but his sense of humor, you can feel the next chapter stirring just beneath the surface, where the warmth of the fire gives way to the cold realities of brawls, beds, and bleary-eyed beginnings. It was bound to happen. It always starts with something small. Maybe someone tips their mug and soaks a neighbor's sleeve. Or perhaps a dice game goes sideways, and suddenly everyone's an expert in probability and poor loser etiquette. Or perhaps 2 stubborn souls lay claim to the same wobbly bench, neither willing to budge an inch, not even for the patron saint of sawbacks. And of course, someone's bound to mutter an ill-advised comment about someone else's mother. Whether she's a goat, the soup, or the entire livestock section, it's irrelevant. Because in the blink of an eye, your medieval tavern transforms. The music stumbles to a halt, laughter skips a beat, and the air shivers with anticipation. A stool soars through the haze, a tankard skitters across the rushes, and a voice bellows, "Hold my bread," as if that's the only thing worth saving. A man launches himself over a bench, legs pinwheeling, arms flailing, landing somewhere between heroism and humiliation. No one looks shocked. If anything, there's a collective shrug. A bar fight here isn't a disaster. It's practically tonight's main event. It's as routine as running out of clean cups or finding a chicken in your lap. Here, chaos is more slapstick than sinister. Fists fly, but rarely connect with anything more threatening than a friend's shoulder or a stranger's dinner. Someone inevitably slips, taking a heroic plunge into a bowl of pottage that, frankly, needed more excitement anyway. Hair gets yanked, beards are given a surprise tug, shirts are torn with a theatrical flourish. The tavern keeper. Picture a battlefield general armed with a soup ladle in one hand and a club in the other, roaring orders with a voice that could curdle milk. Occasionally, someone wades into the fray with no clue what's happening, drawn by the gravitational pull of commotion and the irresistible urge to participate. Others cheer from the sidelines, placing bets with whatever they can find to use as currency, whether that's a button, a couple of beans, or even half a crust of bread, while some simply slide their mugs out of harm's way and protect their ale with the fierce devotion of a mother wolf. Weapons are, mercifully, a rarity. Everyone knows that drawing steel turns a farce into a tragedy, and no one wants to be the reason the only warm, food-serving establishment in town slams its doors in their face forever. Better to stick to fists and furniture. Bruises heal, banishment lingers. Eventually, the energy fizzles out. Someone sprawls on the floor and doesn't get back up, not because they're defeated, but because the floor is suddenly the most appealing seat in the house. Someone else, having ricocheted off a wall, sits down for a quiet moment of life reassessment. Like a candle guttering at last, the brawl ends as abruptly as it began. There's no ceremony, no lingering tension, just a collective sigh of relief and the quiet, unspoken agreement that it's time to move on. And here's the strange magic of the place. In 10 minutes, the tavern resets. The combatants are separated, mugs are topped up. Someone strums the opening notes of a song, and laughter bubbles back up. Even the fellow with the bleeding nose joins in, grinning as a new nickname is christened, perhaps One-Eyed Arnold or Benchbreaker Bill, depending on who provided the evening's finest spectacle. In a medieval tavern, a scuffle isn't a catastrophe. It's just another round of entertainment, as integral as the bard or the bottomless stew pot. If no one emerges too badly battered, it's all part of the fun, a bit of communal absurdity that somehow strengthens the bonds between patrons. Now, as the night deepens, the bard has surrendered to gravity and sleep, his song trailing off mid-verse. You're full of mystery stew, ingredients best left undefined, and cider that's just begun to hint at vinegar. It's time to bed down, or at least attempt the medieval version of sleep. Forget everything you've ever heard about soft mattresses and scented sheets. This is not a luxury retreat. If the tavern offers lodging, it's lightly perched up a staircase that creaks in protest with every step. You duck under beams designed to test the metal of your skull, and find yourself in a cramped room, cold and universally shared. Privacy is fiction. You're shoulder to shoulder, hip to hip, with strangers of all shapes and volumes. Some snore like cathedral bells. Others mutter dreams in dialects you've never heard. The beds, if you can call them that, are straw-stuffed mattresses, thin as promises, and riddled with what the locals affectionately call companions. You don't so much undress as collapse, boots still on, dagger tucked under your pillow, not for comfort, but for peace of mind. Blankets are communal, so are the smells. If garlic made an appearance at supper, and it always does, You'll be sharing its pungent embrace long after you drift off. Should you arrive too late, too poor, or too thoroughly pickled for a room, there's always the taproom floor. A bench, the shadow under a table, or a cozy spot by the hearth, curled up beside a dog that might belong to the tavern, might not, and may in fact be a very furry guest. You'll be stepped on, sneezed upon, and perhaps used as a temporary footrest. Comfort is negotiable. Cleanliness is a distant dream. Safety, though, safety is surprisingly real. The fire pushes the chill back just enough. The tavern keeper, ever vigilant, keeps watch with one eye open and a club at arm's reach. And the constant noise, murmurs, the crackle of logs, the faint, lingering echo of a fart somewhere in the rafters, becomes its own lullaby. A symphony of humanity, alive and unfiltered. Sleep comes eventually, not gently but inevitably. You drift off amid the warmth and the noise, the faint hope that your boots will still be yours in the morning, your only real concern. You wake with a neck that feels like it's been trampled by livestock, a mouth drier than the landlord's wit, and a bruise you can't quite account for. But you survived. For a handful of hours you slept among travelers, pickpockets, pilgrims, and farmers. No kings, no priests, no quiet. Just snoring, straw, and the tenuous promise of another day. Dawn enters not with grace, but with the subtlety of a tax collector, slipping grey light through the cracks in the shutters and prodding you awake with chilly insistence. The tavern is transformed, not silent, but subdued in that way only the morning after a night of excess can achieve. You crack an eye open. There's a boot pressed to your chest, its owner snoring on, oblivious. Someone is muttering about sheep taxes, probably in their sleep, but possibly not. The bard has migrated under a table, clutching his lute with the desperate affection of a man who has lost everything but his music. A chicken, origin unknown, struts across the floor, pecking at stale bread and dignity alike. No one questions its presence. The fire is little more than embers now, the air tinged with the smoky remains of last night's warmth. A handful of patrons begin to stir, groaning and stretching, faces creased with regret and the memory of at least one questionable decision. One man sits up, takes in the scene, and promptly lies back down, having decided to postpone consciousness for another hour. Of course, the tavern keeper is already up, clattering mugs and sweeping straw into new piles. Something unidentifiable bubbles in a pot over the fire, exuding an aroma that is equal parts inviting and mildly threatening. With the authority of a monarch, the keeper bangs a ladle against a mug, the medieval equivalent of a fire alarm. Up or out, that's the only breakfast spell you'll get. There's no buffet, no spread of pastries and fruit. If fortune smiles on you, there's more pottage, thicker than before, and bread revived by a quick turn over the fire. The ale has been generously diluted, but no one has the energy to complain. Some just stagger outside and dump their heads in the rain barrel, the closest thing to a spa treatment available. You check your pouch, 2 coins and a button. Miraculously, your boots are still there, though one has acquired a suspicious bite mark. Small victories. Gradually, new faces drift in. Early risers, travelers, and those in need of liquid courage before facing livestock, taxes, or the day's first awkward conversation with a neighbor. The tavern stirs, slow and creaky, like an old beast waking from hibernation. Someone begins retelling the saga of last night's brawl, embellishing with each retelling. Now there were 3 fights, and the bard's psalm summoned a ghost. Everyone nods solemnly. The story is gospel. Morning in the tavern is a patchwork of groans, laughter, and the low hum of recovery. The night was raucous. The morning is a kind of shared penance. Yet, as you scrape the sleep from your eyes and brush the straw from your hair, you find yourself smiling. You've survived the sweat, the smoke, the sticky ale underfoot, the shouting, the flirting, the food that could double as masonry, and possibly a flying bench. And in all of that, an odd truth emerges. The medieval tavern wasn't just a place to drink away your coin. It was the pulsing heart of the community, a place where news arrived before letters, where a merchant's tale from the coast could travel faster than a royal messenger. Soldiers brought war stories to the hearth. Bards stitched strangers together with songs that changed every night, and gossip traveled faster than the wind. Farmers and craftsmen, pilgrims and thieves, all found a place at the same table. Here social classes blurred at the edges. Rumors were born, alliances forged, grudges either buried or reignited, depending on the roll of the dice. Business happened here too. Deals sealed over splinters and spilled cider. Contracts negotiated with a handshake and a wink. The tavern was equal parts courthouse, confessional, and theatre. You might find work, lose your purse, get married, or start a lifelong feud before your tankard ran dry. But more than anything, the tavern offered relief, refuge from the cold, the labor, and the relentless seriousness of survival. For a precious few hours, you could gather beside the fire, listen to a joke of questionable quality, sing a song even worse, and remember, if only briefly, that life wasn't just toil and hardship. Even if the ale bordered on vinegar, the bed itched with the promise of new companions, and the stew boasted more bones than broth. The tavern gave you something rare, belonging. In an age when winter, or war, or a sudden fever could snatch you from the world, to be warm and alive among the living was a small miracle. So when you step into a medieval tavern, you're not simply buying a drink. You're buying a story, a place in something bigger, and, with luck, a spot by the fire where the embers outlast the night. Before there were cafes and coffee houses, before there were pubs and parlors, there was the tavern, loud, dirty, honest, and absolutely unforgettable. And speaking of unforgettable, history is full of figures who, like these rowdy tavern regulars, left their mark in ways both mysterious and profound. Our next journey takes us to the gilded sands of ancient Egypt, where a woman cloaked in intrigue would, in time, become the most recognizable face of the ancient world. Before she was immortalized in a limestone bust with high cheekbones and a gaze frozen in serene confidence, Nefertiti remained shrouded in mystery. Tonight, as you drift into the ancient hush of Egypt's shifting sands, you find yourself face to face with the most enigmatic woman to ever wear its crown. Nefertiti, the beautiful one, has come. Her name itself, a riddle whispered through centuries, emerges before you, not as a distant legend, but as a living, breathing presence. You sense her arrival like a sudden bolt of desert lightning, fierce and illuminating, yet leaving only questions in its wake. Where did she come from? Was she the daughter of a powerful Egyptian courtier named Ai, perhaps even the sister of the man who would become Akhenaten? Or did she sail from distant lands, a foreign princess wrapped in silk and intrigue, traded in a royal alliance? The scholars squabble, the papyrus crinkles, and the truth slips away like water through your fingers. But one truth gleams through the uncertainty. Nefertiti's impact is undeniable. Her story stamped onto the stones of Egypt with a force that cannot be erased. You step into the sun-drenched city of Akhenaten, modern Amarna, a place conjured from nothing on the orders of a king and queen who dared to defy 1,000 years of tradition. Nefertiti doesn't merely appear at the edge of history. She storms onto the scene, not as a background figure or a ceremonial wife, but as an equal partner. Her presence as vivid as the midday glare. You see her beside Akhenaten, not demurely tucked behind the throne, but shoulder to shoulder, eyes fixed on the horizon, ready to upend the world you thought you knew. Together, they dismantle Egypt's ancient pantheon, sweep aside the crowded temples, the smoky offerings, the endless rows of gods with animal heads and inscrutable smiles. In their place, they raise a new deity, the Aten, radiant sun disk, whose rays reach down like golden fingers, caressing the faces of the royal family in every carved relief. It's a move that shakes the ground beneath your sandaled feet. Imagine the priests, their incense snuffed out, their sanctuary shuttered. Imagine the city dwellers, blinking in the sudden light of monotheism, their old gods chiseled off the walls, their familiar rituals declared obsolete. Akhenaten, once Amenhotep IV, rechristens himself and the nation, and Nefertiti is with him every step, a silhouette as constant as the sunrise. You watch her in the painted halls, not waiting in the shadows, but leading processions, pouring libations, making offerings to the Aten, with a poise that turns onlookers to stone. The sculptors love her. Her likeness blooms everywhere, on stelae, on temple walls, on tiny amulets slipping through ancient fingers. In some scenes, she even eclipses Akhenaten, her form larger, her gestures more commanding, her crown sky blue and towering. In a world where queens are usually consigned to background roles, present but silent, powerful but invisible, Nefertiti is a revelation. She is depicted smiting enemies, a role once reserved for gods and kings. She rides chariots through the city gates, blue crown gleaming, the horses' hooves drumming a rhythm of change. In some reliefs, she stands alone, offering tribute with a solemnity that suggests not just partnership, but sovereignty. Some whisper she was more than queen, perhaps a co-ruler, or even, for a time, a pharaoh in her own right. In a society where the pharaoh's divinity is unchallenged, her proximity to Akhenaten, spiritual, political, and physical, suggests a partnership that transcends mere marriage. You see it in the way her name is chanted in hymns, carved into stone, side by side with his, basked in the same divine sunlight. But this era of dazzling transformation is not without its shadows. Egypt's old priesthood seethes in silence, their power slipping away with each sunrise. The capital itself is uprooted, transplanted from Thebes to this new city of Akhetaten, as if the royal couple are determined to sever every tie with the past. You walk the streets of this new city, the air thick with dust and the aroma of fresh-cut limestone. The scent of wet clay mingles with the sweat of laborers, all to serve the vision of two people who have made themselves the center of a new universe. Nefertiti's image is everywhere, her eyes calm, her posture regal, her presence inescapable. Yet for all her public grandeur, there is also intimacy. The art of this period is different, looser, more fluid, almost shockingly human. In one scene, you watch Nefertiti and Akhenaten sit cross-legged on cushions, their daughters tumbling over their laps, the rays of Aten ending in tiny, tender hands that reach for their faces. The king and queen are shown kissing, playing, laughing, a family captured in the full warmth of the sun. It is a portrait so intimate, so alive, that you almost forget you're standing in a world ruled by gods. And Nefertiti, always at the heart of it, she bears Akhenaten, 6 daughters, Meritaten, Meketaten, Anchisenpaaten, and others, each one depicted with the same elongated heads and delicate limbs, crowding around their mother in the royal apartments. The absence of a son becomes a quiet ache beneath the surface. Egypt, obsessed with bloodlines and succession, buzzes with rumors. Was it fate or something else? Did Akhenaten father sons with another wife? Or, as some whisper, with Nefertiti herself? A possibility that sends modern historians into fits of speculation and discomfort. The truth, as ever, is elusive. But what is certain is that motherhood becomes central to Nefertiti's image. You see her cradling her children, their tiny hands brushing her cheeks, their laughter echoing against the cool stone walls. These are not the rigid, distant depictions of earlier queens. These are scenes full of warmth and motion, carved with a tenderness that softens the divine, making it touchable. The goddess and the mother, united in one figure, and yet, always, something more. Still, there is another side, a side of power and preparation. In countless images, Nefertiti dons the blue war crown, stands tall and unaccompanied, performing rituals and duties once reserved for kings. She smites foreign foes, her arm raised in righteous fury, the crowd of courtiers bowing low before her. These are not symbolic flourishes, but evidence of real authority. The message is clear. Nefertiti is no mere consort. She is being groomed, perhaps, for something greater, perhaps even for rule itself. As Akhenaten's health wanes, worn down by stress, by possible genetic ailments, and perhaps by the weight of so much change, the balance of power shifts. Whispers slip through the palace corridors. Nefertiti is taking on more responsibility, holding audiences, making decisions, becoming the face of a revolution that has begun to tremble under its own weight. Yet, just as her star reaches its zenith, the records begin to blur. The stone carvings grow fewer. The inscriptions falter. The air once bright with her presence thickens with uncertainty. You find yourself searching for her, peering into the gloom of history. One day, she is everywhere, her name sung in hymns, her figure etched into every wall, her influence radiant and undeniable. The next, she is gone. No tomb, no funerary inscription, no royal burial, no last words. Just a silence so profound it echoes through the centuries, daring you to fill it with your own questions. Did she die young, taken by illness or intrigue? Did she fall from grace, exiled from the city she helped build? Or did she, as some believe, ascend to a power even greater, perhaps as the pharaoh Shmenkare, disguised beneath a different name? The possibilities swirl around you, as mysterious and alluring as the queen herself. In the end, Nefertiti's reign is a paradox, at once blindingly visible and utterly unknowable. She stands at the intersection of history and myth, her story a tapestry of brilliance and absence, power and mystery. And as you drift further into the shadows of ancient Egypt, you sense that her legend is only just beginning to unfold. Because, just as suddenly as she appeared, Nefertiti will vanish, leaving behind a trail of questions, a city of sun-baked stones, and a legacy that refuses to fade. And so, as the light of Aten slips behind the horizon, you follow the last traces of the Queen's story, into the silence, into the unknown. One day, Nefertiti was everywhere, etched into walls, praised in hymns, ruling alongside a revolutionary pharaoh. But what happened after the world turned its gaze away? The mystery of her disappearance, and the legend she left behind, awaits you in the next chapter. Picture yourself in ancient Egypt, the air shimmering with heat, and the distant sound of temple drums echoing across the Nile. Her elegant profile is carved into golden walls, her name spoken in reverent tones by priests and courtiers alike. Nefertiti is the queen whose beauty is a byword, whose power rivals that of her husband, Akhenaten. In every public ceremony, every ritual at the sun-drenched altars of the new god Aten, she stands tall beside her king. If Egypt had a favorite, it was her. And then, as if the desert wind itself carried her away, she is gone. One moment, her face is the face of an age. The next, her name vanishes from every inscription, her image quietly erased from the stage of history. No trumpets, no lamentations, not even a whisper of mourning. You find yourself straining to hear her footsteps in the corridors of power, but all that greets you is silence, and perhaps the faint, suspicious shuffle of a palace cat, whose loyalties, much like history's, remain elusive. Around the 12th year of Akhenaten's 17-year reign, the evidence simply dries up. The scribes, once so attentive, stop mentioning her. The artists who once immortalized her in radiant stone now turn their chisels elsewhere. Where did she go? Why does a woman so central to Egypt's most seismic social experiment vanish as if swallowed by the shifting sands. It's as if the Nile itself changed course overnight, and no one dared record it. Here's where the mystery begins to coil around you, cool and unsettling, like a breeze through the pillared halls of the palace at Amarna. Some historians take the path of least resistance. They say she died, perhaps suddenly, perhaps in childbirth, as so many women did, even those crowned with lotus diadems. There's a certain hard logic to it, the kind you find in the endless ledgers of palace life. A second daughter, Meketaten, also disappears from the record at this time, hinting at a possible double tragedy, a mother and daughter lost together, their names drifting into the darkness of untold stories. Yet if that's the case, why is there no pageantry, no grand procession to the afterlife? This was a queen worshipped like a living goddess. Her funeral should have shaken the earth and filled the sky with incense. Instead, there's only absence, no tomb, no stelae, no carved scene of mourners wailing in ritual grief. If Nefertiti simply died, Egypt's silence is deafening. It's as if the palace chef stopped serving bread, but no one bothered to complain, which, in ancient Egypt, was as unthinkable as a day without the sun. Others point to the thrum of politics beneath the surface, a court bristling with intrigue, shifting alliances like the unpredictable tides of the Nile. Maybe Nefertiti fell from favor, her star eclipsed by rivals or by Akhenaten's own growing isolation. Some suggest that the queen was quietly sidelined, replaced by another consort, or perhaps even by a mysterious co-ruler. There's a shadowy figure, Smenkhkare, who flickers briefly in the historical record, an enigma draped in royal regalia. Was this a son, a brother, or could it have been Nefertiti herself, ruling in disguise under a new name? The theory is as electrifying as it is confounding. One set of inscriptions points to a ruler named Neferneferuarten, whose titles and grammar suggest a woman, and whose references to Akhenaten as beloved husband are hard to ignore. Was this Nefertiti, trading her queen's crown for the striped names of a pharaoh? If she did, she would have achieved what only a handful of women ever managed in all of Egyptian history, a female king, standing shoulder to shoulder with the likes of Hatshepsut. But the evidence is as fragmentary as a half-eaten loaf in an Amarna bakery. Neferneferuarten's reign, if it existed, is brief and abruptly truncated. The records that could have confirmed it are as elusive as a palace recipe without sand in it. And then, as the curtain falls, a new name steps onto the stage. Tutankhaten, soon to be Tutankhamun, the boy king whose fame would eventually eclipse them all. If Nefertiti ruled, it was as a shadow, a ghost queen glimpsed only in the broken shards of cartouches and the lingering scent of myrrh in abandoned halls. Now, as you drift through the corridors of history, you can almost hear the hush that follows her disappearance. The grand experiment of Amarna begins to crumble. The old gods return. And at the center of this seismic shift, a child pharaoh ascends, Tutankhamun, the most famous name in Egypt, though he barely stands as tall as the crook he wields. Yet the question gnaws at you, who guided his trembling hands? Who whispered the ancient prayers in his ear, steering Egypt back toward the old ways? Some say it was Nefertiti, ruling from behind the scenes, her wisdom shaping the boy king's every move. Others point to the high priest Ai, possibly her father, whose political skill and appetite for power were as sharp as a temple knife. Or perhaps it was a committee of survivors, each with their own score to settle and their own gods to appease. Evidence does not yield its secrets easily. A golden shrine found in Tutankhamun's tomb shows a woman anointing the king, her features hauntingly similar to Nefertiti's. Could this be her? Not vanished, but quietly present, guiding Egypt's destiny from the shadows. Or is this simply wishful thinking, the mind's attempt to fill the void left by her vanishing act? Without a tomb, without a mummy, all we have are fragments, a sculpted cheekbone, a bust that gazes across centuries, a handful of inscriptions that stop just short of saying her name. It's an absence that echoes. The Egyptians, those tireless chroniclers of every feast and festival, left no record of her death, no monument to her passing. For a society obsessed with the afterlife, where even minor officials were mummified with a thoroughness that would put modern preservationists to shame, the disappearance of a queen is nothing short of scandalous. You can almost hear the gossips in the market stalls. Did she offend the gods, or simply take the best bread recipe and run? Theories flower and wither in the heat of speculation. Some say she was buried in haste, her memory deliberately erased as the Amarna period collapsed. Perhaps her radical vision for Egypt made her a threat to the new regime, and her tomb was dismantled, her name chiseled out in an act of historical vengeance. The return to the old gods was swift, and with it came a campaign of destruction. Heretical images smashed, names defaced, history rewritten with the efficiency of a palace scribe cleaning up after a particularly scandalous banquet. Others cling to a more tantalizing hope. What if her tomb is not lost, but merely hidden? Could it lie behind the walls of Tutankhamun's own burial chamber, a secret room sealed off by layers of plaster and gold? In 2015, the world held its breath as radar scans hinted at hidden chambers in KV-62, the very tomb that made Tutankhamun a household name. Was Nefertiti resting just a few feet away, hidden from view, but not from imagination? Archaeologists and amateur sleuths alike dreamed of discovering her, perhaps reclining on a gilded bier, her jewelry still glinting in the torchlight. But as with so many dreams, reality intervened. The scans fizzled, the evidence proved inconclusive, and Nefertiti slipped back into the shadows, leaving only the scent of incense and a trail of unanswered questions. And yet, her presence refuses to be forgotten. There are images, dozens, perhaps hundreds, scattered across museums and temples, her likeness carved in limestone or painted in vivid ochre. The famous bust in Berlin still draws crowds, her gaze as enigmatic as ever, as if she alone knows the secret of her fate. You stand before her, separated by glass and time, and feel the weight of her silence. She is waiting, you sense, for the world to catch up. Each year, as new excavations begin in Amarna and the Valley of the Kings, whispers rise like the morning mist. Will this be the season when a sealed chamber finally yields its secrets? Will a cartouche in the sand spell out her true name, ending the centuries-old game of hide-and-seek? Or will Nefertiti remain the eternal riddle, a question mark at the end of Egypt's most tumultuous chapter? If history set out to bury her, it did not succeed. For the search for Nefertiti only grows more urgent with every unanswered question, every flicker of intrigue. You feel it, even now, as you wander the ruins in your mind's eye, the sense that something vital remains just out of reach, like a hidden door in a palace wall, or the lingering taste of honey in a cup long emptied. And so, her disappearance is not an ending, but a beginning. The legend of Nefertiti, queen, priestess, possible pharaoh, is woven into the very dust of Egypt. Her absence is a presence, her silence a challenge. Perhaps she is destined to remain the queen who slipped through history's fingers, her story kept alive by the very mystery of her vanishing. But the most remarkable thing is this: though we have no tomb, no mummy, and no conclusive inscription, her legacy endures. The world cannot stop searching for her. Every generation renews the quest, because sometimes the greatest stories are the ones with missing endings. And as the ancient city of Amarna crumbles beneath your feet, and the last rays of sunlight catch on the face of her immortal bust, you find yourself wondering, not just where she went, but why we still remember her at all. Which, as luck would have it, is exactly where our journey takes us next. If her tomb was never found, and her body never identified, why do we still remember Nefertiti? Let's slip quietly into the next chapter and unravel the enduring mystery and legacy of Egypt's most elusive queen. You find yourself standing in a hushed gallery, the air cool and heavy with the scent of old stone and polished glass. The lights are low, but ahead, a single figure glows beneath the soft spill of a spotlight, a face immortal, enigmatic, and impossibly serene. There she is, Nefertiti. Not her bones, not her tomb, but her legacy, resting behind museum glass in Berlin's Neues Museum. This isn't just a bust, it's a gaze that seems to see straight through centuries, a presence that hushes even the most enthusiastic school group into reverent silence. Her long neck arches upward, her blue crown rises like the crest of the Nile at dawn, and her features, so precise, so symmetrical, almost feel more modern than ancient. Yet one eye remains unfinished, the iris absent, as if her sculptor paused mid-stroke, distracted by eternity or by the coming storm outside the workshop. Was it deliberate? Was it an accident? You can almost hear the faint scrape of a chisel, the murmur of craftsmen, the whisper that something sacred has just been revealed. It was 1912 when Ludwig Borchardt, a German archaeologist with a knack for dusty surprises, swept away the last layer of debris from the studio of Thutmose in Amarna and gasped at the sight before him. He scribbled in his diary that night, "No use describing it. You have to see it." And once the world did see it, once Nefertiti's likeness emerged into the modern age, she wasn't just a queen lost to time. She became an icon, a symbol of beauty, power, and the great riddle of ancient Egypt. Her bust draws crowds as reliably as the Mona Lisa. In a city where winter chills your bones and bratwurst fills your belly, she is the Sun Queen who never sets. But even this most famous of faces is not free from controversy. How did she come to rest in Berlin, so far from the Nile's embrace? The answer is as tangled as the musty storerooms of early 20th century archaeology. Back then, rules about antiquities were, let's say, flexible, sometimes written in sand, often swept away by the next wind. Egypt has spent decades asking for her homecoming, insisting that the queen belongs among the golden light and shifting dunes of her homeland. Germany, on the other hand, clutches her tightly, citing her age and fragility, and perhaps the not-so-secret fact that she's their greatest draw. Prestige, profit, and the politics of possession. Nefertiti presides over it all, silent and unmoved. Yet wherever she stands, her legacy radiates far beyond the plinth and the glass. She is not just a beautiful face. Look again at the lines of her jaw, the firmness in her mouth, the tilt of her chin. There's something regal here, yes, but also something quietly defiant. She doesn't ask for your admiration, she commands it. You can almost imagine her stepping from her pedestal, voice calm but unyielding, ready to debate matters of state or faith. Nefertiti wasn't a passive ornament in a gilded court. Her image appears in scenes of worship, of royal processions, sometimes even in the midst of battle. She's there not only beside power, but wielding it, shaping it, and perhaps outshining the men around her. It's astonishing to consider how a silent sculpture, delicate and battered by time, can rekindle the memory of a woman the world tried so hard to erase. Her tomb remains lost, her body a phantom haunting the corridors of history. We don't know how she died or where she rests. But through this bust, Nefertiti achieved a second kind of immortality, one that outlasts gold and stone. Her face, calm and enigmatic, speaks across the ages, telling a story that is as much about us as it is about her. Her story lingers in the spaces between what's carved in stone and what's left unsaid. She is one of the best documented women of the ancient world, yet so much about her slips through our fingers like desert sand. Over centuries, she's been recast and reimagined. A goddess in mortal form, the living vessel of divine beauty, a shrewd strategist, the real architect of power in a court of men, a tragic romantic, swept away by the tides of revolution, a ruthless survivor, navigating the collapse of an empire with calculated grace. Each generation paints her in a new light, hoping to catch the truth in the gleam of a myth. But what do we truly know? We know she was far more than a royal consort. Her image rivals that of kings. Her presence looms in the rituals, the ceremonies, even in the rare, shadowy depictions of battle. She didn't simply walk beside power, she defined it. In a world carved by patriarchy, she claimed her own space, not through open rebellion, but with a presence so magnetic it could not be ignored. It's no accident that she stands at the center of one of history's most radical religious shifts. Akhenaten may have dreamed up the new sun cult, but it was Nefertiti who became its living icon, the bridge between the Aten's radiance above and the people below. She was more than a servant of the gods, she was their reflection on earth. And then, as if overnight, she vanished. The backlash against Akhenaten's heresies swept her name from the temples, smashed her statues, and scoured her memory from official records. It was a kind of organized forgetting, a historical sleight of hand designed to erase her from the story. Yet here you are, 3,000 years later, still whispering her name, still piecing together her legend from shards and echoes. Why? Because where facts fail, myth endures. Because when a woman becomes both an icon and an enigma, she slips into a space where time itself grows uncertain. Because sometimes the questions are more powerful than the answers, and Nefertiti seems to have mastered the art of not being fully known. Perhaps that was her secret ambition, not to be explained, but to be remembered. Not to be contained by a single story, but to become the queen of endless speculation. More than 30 centuries have passed since Nefertiti last stepped into Egypt's relentless sun, but her shadow still stretches across continents. You see her in the glass of the museum, in the pages of books, flickering on documentary screens, inspiring artists and dreamers. Unlike most figures from the far past, she hasn't faded, if anything. She grows more vivid with each retelling. There's something magnetic about her mystery. Beauty draws the crowd. But it's the unanswered questions that keep us coming back. The deliberate gaps in her biography are like a puzzle she left behind. A challenge tossed across the ages. Try to understand me, if you dare. And so, Nefertiti has become something more than a historical figure. She's an archetype. Every era reshapes her in its own image. To early 20th century eyes, she was an exotic, silent queen. In the age of feminism, she's a symbol of lost female power, an ancient ruler erased by male scribes. Modern media spins her as everything from a fashion icon to an African queen, a political mastermind, perhaps even a pharaoh in her own right. She has lived 1,000-second lives, not through certainty, but through the fertile ground of imagination. Maybe that's the truest afterlife of all. In ancient Egypt, immortality wasn't just about preserving the body. It was about living on in memory. If your name was spoken, if your likeness endured, you could walk among the gods, travel the fields of paradise, and exist beyond the reach of death. Nefertiti, by chance or by cunning, achieved exactly that. Her name is spoken on every continent. Her face is one of the most recognizable in human history. Her story, though patchwork, still commands our attention and our wonder. So it turns out, her greatest monument wasn't a hidden tomb or a sealed chamber beneath desert sands. It was the irresistible curiosity she left behind. A perfect mystery, half erased, half revealed, and utterly unforgettable. Perhaps that was her final, most powerful act, not just to rule, not just to shape faith, but to become timeless. The beautiful one who has come never truly departed. She remains here, in our questions and our awe, in that aching need to remember the women history tried so hard to silence. She lives not in gold, not in stone, but in the eternal act of being searched for. And honestly, what could be more immortal than that? As you linger in the museum's silent glow, Nefertiti's enigmatic eyes following your every step, the world outside seems to grow quieter, as if time itself has paused to listen. But history never sleeps. Beyond the Nile, beyond the sands, another story waits. One of terraces carved into mountains and fields, rippling like the scales of a dragon. China, where the clouds hang low and the wind hums through bamboo groves, a dragon lies coiled. You find yourself in southern China, where the mountains sigh beneath a heavy quilt of mist, and the air carries the music of bamboo leaves rattling in a gentle wind. Here, in this ancient landscape, a dragon slumbers, not a creature of flame and terror, but a patient marvel of stone and soil, shaped by the touch of countless hands across centuries. The locals call it the dragon's backbone, the Longji rice terraces, and to stand at their edge is to gaze into a living legend, one made not of scales and claws, but of water, mud, and unyielding human will. From your vantage point, the terraces ripple across the mountainside in hypnotic, endless waves. Each curve gleams with water, or shimmers with new rice. And for a moment, it's easy to imagine the mountain itself breathing. At dawn, the mist settles in the valleys, looping through the terraces like the dragon's own breath, curling softly between the ridges, just as it has for centuries. The landscape blurs the line between dream and waking, myth and memory. The dragon is not a beast to be slain, but a mountain to be tended, fed, and honored. Step closer, and you hear the subtle music of this place. Water trickles through slender channels, tracing paths carved by hands that are long gone, but not forgotten. Seedlings tremble in the cool breeze, delicate as eyelashes. You feel the land's pulse in the soft, steady flow, like a heartbeat, patient and eternal. The terraces are not the work of a single lifetime. Their story began more than 7 centuries ago, when the Zhuang and Yao peoples, bound to these mountains by generations of memory and hardship, looked up at the steep, unwelcoming slopes and saw not defeat, but possibility. Imagine the challenge. Level ground was rare, and the tools at hand were simple: stone blades, wooden hoes, baskets woven from bamboo. Machinery, in those days, was as fantastical as dragons. Yet the mountain offered an answer, if only they could learn to listen. Slowly, year by year, they began to tame the wild hillsides, carving out terraces with a patience that bordered on reverence. Inch by inch, foot by foot, they coaxed the slopes into gentle steps, teaching the earth to yield rice instead of rock. Each new level was a promise, a whisper of hope. The people did not simply take from the land, they negotiated, they persuaded. The terraces rose, one atop another, like vertebrae along the dragon's spine. Water, once a force of chaos, became a companion, guided by ditches and canals that snaked along the mountain's bones. Rain was no longer a threat, but a gift. Gravity, once the enemy, became an ally, carrying life from spring to field, from field to mouth. As the terraces grew, so did the legend. From afar, the mountains appeared to undulate, the terraces twisting and turning in harmonious procession. Some say you can trace the dragon's head, tail, and scales as the land rises and falls in measured rhythm. At sunrise, the water in the paddies catches the first light, shimmering gold and silver, each reflection a flicker of the dragon's spirit. In the early morning, as you walk the narrow paths between levels, your footsteps join the quiet chorus of those who came before. The ones who first imagined the mountain could be more than a boundary. It could be a home. Yet, for all their beauty, the Longji terraces are a monument to necessity. The mountain slopes are steep and unforgiving. The valleys were already claimed, the rich flatlands gone to earlier settlers. Here, survival meant adaptation. The terraces, each meticulously measured and reinforced by hand-laid stones, were an answer to hunger and scarcity. Every wall, every channel, every muddy step was a testament to the ingenuity and stubborn hope of people who refused to let the mountain win. Picture the scene centuries ago. Men and women bent double beneath woven hats, their hands caked with earth, their backs marked by the burden of baskets heaped with stones and mud. Children, too young to work, splashed in the shallows, learning by imitation and laughter. There were no blueprints, no written instructions. Knowledge passed from mouth to ear, from hand to hand, a choreography of experience and intuition. The elders watched the sky, reading the language of clouds and birds. The young learned to hear the song of water moving through the fields. Precision mattered. Too steep, and the water would run wild, tearing apart months of labor. Too flat, and the rice would drown in stagnant pools. Every terrace was a compromise, a negotiation between the needs of the crop and the demands of the land. It's easy to romanticize this labor, to imagine it as an endless pastoral idyll. In reality, it was backbreaking, muddy, and sometimes perilous. The stones were heavy, the mud clung to your legs, and the air, thick with the scent of wet earth, buzzed with insects determined to claim their share of the harvest. And yet, there is a quiet dignity in this work. Each terrace was more than a farm. It was a legacy. To build a terrace was to lay a foundation for future generations, to offer them not just food, but a place in the world. Today, when you walk the Dragon's Backbone, you see that the pact between people and mountain endures. The terraces are still farmed, still repaired every year by hands familiar with both the wisdom and the aches of the past. There are no bulldozers, no concrete reinforcements, no shortcuts. The villagers patch the stone walls, clear the channels, and plant the rice as their ancestors did. The tools may have improved slightly, perhaps a steel shovel here, a plastic bucket there, but the rhythm remains unchanged. The terraces persist because tradition, when rooted deep enough, can outlast even the fiercest storm. The dragon, if not immortal, is at least very stubborn. If the terraces are the dragon's bones, water is its blood, pulsing quietly through the maze of channels and ditches. The design is brilliant in its simplicity. Rainwater and mountain springs collect at the summit, where it is caught in narrow trenches and earthen aqueducts. Gravity does the rest. The water flows from the highest paddies to the lowest, trickling through each level in a carefully orchestrated dance. Subtle gates made of stone or wood are adjusted by hand to ensure the right amount of water reaches each field. Too much, and disaster. Too little, and famine. There are no valves, no pumps, no digital sensors, only the practiced touch of those who know the land's every mood. Villagers walk the ridges daily, feet bare, eyes sharp for signs of trouble, a leak here, a blockage there, a stone out of place. It's less like farming and more like tuning a delicate instrument, where each note must be perfect or the entire song falters. The water carries more than sustenance. In spring, when the terraces are first flooded, the paddies become mirrors, reflecting the sky in flawless sheets of glass. It's as if the mountain itself has turned its face upward to watch the clouds drifting by. At night, the stars scatter across the water, and for a moment you could believe you are walking through a landscape suspended between earth and heaven. Then summer arrives, and the glassy fields are overtaken by green. Rice plants surge upward, their slender blades rippling in the breeze, turning the terraces into an undulating sea. The reflections fade, replaced by the motion of life, frogs calling, dragonflies darting, the air trembling with the promise of harvest. In autumn, the green gives way to gold. The rice is ripe, heavy with grain, and the terraces glow in the low sun like molten treasure. Even in winter, when the fields fall silent and frost dusts the stones, The bones of the dragon remain, quiet but enduring, waiting for the first breath of spring to stir them awake. Time passes differently here. It is measured not in hours or days, but in the slow process of water moving from terrace to terrace, in the return of frogs, in the changing scent of wet soil. While the world below counts minutes and chases progress, the people of Longji attune themselves to seasons and cycles, to the endless repetition that is the secret of survival. Spring in these mountains does not announce itself with a riot of blossoms. Instead, it arrives in the soft trickle of meltwater, the gradual swelling of streams that breathe life into the waiting fields. The ritual begins quietly. Farmers rise before the sun. They walk the narrow paths, baskets balanced on their shoulders, straw hats pulled low to shield their eyes from the glare of new light. The terraces, newly flooded, shine with the promise of another year. The air is thick, not with noise, but with anticipation. There are no machines here, no roaring engines or mechanical arms. Each rice seedling, coaxed to life in a nursery bed, is transplanted by hand. The farmers step into the cold water, mud creeping between their toes, and press the young plants into place with careful fingers. It is a rhythm learned over a lifetime. Bend, reach, plant, breathe. Children follow, splashing in the shallows, their laughter mingling with the murmurs of elders sharing advice. There is a sense of ceremony in the work. Offerings are made to the spirits of the mountain. Songs float across the fields. In some villages, the first handful of seedlings is scattered by the eldest as a blessing, a promise renewed each year. No one hurries the dragon. The pace is slow, deliberate, almost meditative. The mountain sets the tempo, and all must follow. In this unhurried dance, patience is the highest virtue. The work is demanding, but it is also an act of faith, a belief that the mountain, if treated with respect, will yield enough to sustain another year. As days pass, the terraces transform. Green shoots rise from the water, their presence both fragile and defiant. Each seed planted is a hope, each row a gentle rebellion against hunger and haste. This is how the cycle begins again, not with fanfare, but with simple acts repeated across time. The dragon stirs, the mountain breathes, and the future is planted one careful, muddy step at a time. Walking these terraces, you see not just a history of agriculture, but a chronicle of dreams and resilience, etched into every stone, every drop of water, every blade of green. Evening settles softly here, the sky caught between the last gold of daylight and the first blue of dusk. The terraces, quiet now, seem to hum with the memory of all those who have walked these paths, hands stained by earth, hearts steady with purpose. There are no monuments, no grand decorations, only the dragon's backbone, sturdy and silent, holding up the sky and the hopes of all who live along its ridges. And as you stand there, breathing in the damp mineral air, you realize that the real wonder is not the dragon itself, but the people who carved its body from stone and soil, who learned to live not against the land, but with it. The Longji terraces are a reminder, an invitation to patience, care, and the slow kind of magic that only centuries can conjure. Now, as the evening mist coils once more along the terraces, and the last echoes of laughter fade, you begin to notice the subtle signs of life scattered among the curves. For the dragon's backbone is not only a feat of engineering, but a living home, one where villages nestle into the land's embrace, and the heartbeat of tradition continues. Let me take you now to where the dragon's backbone rises out of the mountain mist, each vertebra shaped not from bone, but from earth, water, and the persistent hands of generations. Here, between folds of green and gold, villages cling to the slopes, like secrets whispered from one century to the next. You find yourself drifting through Ping'an, Dai, and Jinkan, names that feel like gentle incantations, each syllable tied to the land by memory and myth. These are not mere villages. They are living altars to endurance. Every wooden house perched on stilts in a careful dance with gravity and rain. Every path a ribbon curling up the spine of the terraces. Roofs, soot dark and gracefully slanted, echo the lines of the fields below. So from a distance, the whole settlement looks like lanterns bobbing on a jade sea, floating above a sleeping dragon's back. Step inside, and the world narrows to the glow of a wood fire, the clatter of chopsticks, and the warmth of a home where 3 generations share one roof, one story, and sometimes one slightly wobbly stool. The air is thick with the scent of bamboo smoke and the tang of rice wine, drifting through gaps in the planks and out into the mountains. You are a guest here, but hospitality is never performed. It's as natural as breathing. Someone presses a carved gourd of rice wine into your hand, with a nod that says, "You're family now, at least until the firewood runs out." The people of these heights are the Zhuang and the Red Yao, each with a language shaped by valleys and rain, each with customs that shimmer with the colors of old stories. The women of the Yao are unmistakable. Their hair, unbroken by scissors since childhood, is coiled atop their heads in intricate crowns, sometimes tumbling down like obsidian waterfalls when they bathe in the river. You catch a glimpse one morning, sunlight glancing off black silk, the quiet river holding both woman and legend. It's the kind of sight that makes you wonder if you stumbled into a poem or simply a world where poems are lived instead of written. Despite the steady creep of paved roads and cell towers up the mountain's flank, tradition moves here with a patient step. Indigo-stained cloth dries on bamboo poles. Looms creak in small rooms where sunlight pools on hand-woven patterns, the work of hands far older than yours. When dusk falls, reed pipes and bronze drums call the village together, sometimes for a wedding, sometimes just because the mountain is in the mood for song. Here, ritual is not a performance to impress outsiders. It's a rhythm as old as the terraces, mocking every change in season, every gathering, every farewell. When you arrive, you're offered tea brewed from leaves picked within sight of the kitchen door, and the stories come as freely as the steam from your cup. The elders don't just recount dates or names. They tell you of dragons curling through the mist, of ancestors who carved the first terraces with nothing but hope and a handful of prayers, of spirits who still linger at the edges of the fields. And though tourists arrive now by the busload, the core of village life is a current too deep for casual swimmers. The rice still grows. The old songs still echo against the hills. The terraces and their keepers endure not by resisting change, but by letting it soak in slowly, like water trickling from one paddy down to the next. Time here is not rushed. The whole village seems to breathe in long, slow cycles, as if the mountain itself is teaching you how to be patient. Every path you walk is layered with memory. Every stone step holds the echo of 1,000 footfalls before yours. To wander here is to walk through stories rather than streets. The hills themselves are not just geography. They are alive, woven through with myth and meaning. Locals speak of the dragon that slumbers beneath your feet, its great spine arching into the sky. The terraces, they say, are its scales, rising and falling as the dragon breathes beneath the earth. On misty mornings, when clouds slide in low and the world turns silver, you can almost believe the legend. The fields vanish beneath a sea of white, leaving only the suggestion of movement, the feeling that something ancient and powerful is stretching in its sleep. And when the sun burns the mist away, the terraces emerge, glistening, as if the dragon has just opened one golden eye. The most cherished tale goes like this. Long ago, famine struck, and the people climbed these impossible slopes to plead with the gods. The heavens listened, sending rain, and instructed the villagers to carve the hills so rice might grow. As they worked, the dragon appeared, winding through the clouds, showing them where to cut and where to rest. To this day, the farmers honor both dragon and land. They never shout in the fields. They do not fell a tree without a prayer. Every act of agriculture is a quiet act of reverence. These beliefs are not captured in dusty books or carved into stone. They live in the songs sung as seedlings are pressed into mud, in the incense lit before the first irrigation of spring, in the hush that falls over the terraces on mornings when clouds are thickest. Children grow up with these stories as their first truths, as essential as the taste of rice or the sound of rain on a tin roof. To make light of the dragon is to tempt bad luck. To disrespect the spirits is to risk drought, or worse, an invasion of particularly ill-tempered ducks. Rituals for the water spirits are simple but sacred. Before the first trickle of spring water is released into the highest paddy, a farmer will pour a few drops of rice wine at the edge and bow his head in silent thanks. No audience, no spectacle, just a habit as old as the mountain itself. Whether you believe in dragons or dismiss them as myth, something undeniably sacred hangs in the air. Maybe it's the hush between wind gusts. Maybe it's the taste of the tea. Or perhaps it's the unspoken sense that this place contains more story than any one person could ever hope to unravel. For centuries, these villages were tucked away, hidden by geography and the sheer stubbornness of the mountain. The outside world was a rumor, and the terraces belonged only to the people who shaped and tended them. But the dragon's secret was never meant to last forever. Roads snaked up the hills. Power lines arrived, and with them came visitors, cameras, and the ever-present possibility that the future might arrive, wearing hiking boots and wielding a selfie stick. There was fear at first. Whispers that the mountain would be parceled off, the timber houses replaced by concrete, the living culture pressed into costume for the benefit of outsiders. But the villagers didn't abandon their ways. Instead, they invited the future in for tea and taught it how to use chopsticks. Family homes became guest houses, not resorts. Guests are welcomed not as customers, but as cousins who just happen to have gotten lost on their way to dinner. Meals are served communally, sticky rice steamed inside, fresh-cut bamboo, wild greens plucked at sunrise, and, if you're lucky, a chicken that died of natural causes, possibly from hearing one too many dragon stories. Tourism brings money, but not at the expense of tradition. The fields still demand their due. Every planting season, neighbors gather to guide the water, to press seedlings into the mud by hand, to harvest rice with sickles worn smooth by decades of use. Children might study math and English in the schoolhouse by day, but come sunset they are back in the fields, learning patience from the soil and the slow wisdom of water. Not all the young stay, but many do return. The terraces have a way of calling people home. Maybe it's the sound of frogs singing in the paddies, or the way the mountains swallow the last light of day. Maybe it's the knowledge that here, change is not an enemy, but an old friend who moves with careful steps. The festivals have grown louder, it's true. Microphones sometimes compete with the drums, and signs in Mandarin and English now stand beside sacred springs. But the rituals persist. The elders still lead the processions. Offerings are made. The dragon is never forgotten. The terraces themselves are never the same place twice. While cities might change over years or decades, these fields transform with every season, every rain, every breath of wind. To linger here for a full year is to witness the mountain's own slow, deliberate heartbeat. Spring arrives as a mirror. The terraces are flooded for planting, and the water reflects the sky so perfectly that you might believe you're walking on clouds. The fields are empty to the eye, but below the surface, new life is gathering. Locals say that in spring, the dragon dreams deepest, curled beneath a blanket of silver. Summer unfurls 1,000 shades of green. Rice shoots rocket upward, blanketing the slopes in a lush, endless wave. The air is heavy and sweet, alive with the sound of frogs and the laughter of farmers balancing on narrow mud walls. Hats bob like tiny sails in the sea of green, and the dragon, half awake, stretches toward the sun. Autumn is gold. The terraces blaze with ripe grain, each step catching the light and tossing it back to the sky. It's a time for harvest and celebration. Drums echo from the valleys. Families gather in courtyards. Sticky rice cakes are steamed, and the air is thick with the scent of gratitude. The dragon, fully awake at last, offers up its bounty with a grin that glints in the morning light. Winter brings stillness. The fields are emptied, the water drains away, and sometimes snow drapes the terraces in quiet white. Other years, frost clings to every blade of grass, turning the mountainside into lace. It is the dragon's time to rest. Silence settles over the land. You wander through a world that feels paused, suspended, waiting for the next breath. Each season writes a new verse. Spring is reflection, summer is growth, autumn is feast, winter is rest. The beauty here isn't only in the shape of the land, but in its willingness to change, to adapt, to keep moving, even when the world seems determined to stand still. Photographers try to capture the perfect moment, but the mountain never holds still long enough to be caught. It moves, it breathes, it whispers to anyone willing to listen. So the dragon turns again, not in a rush of fire, but in a steady cycle of water, grain, and wind. The terraces of Longji teach us that beauty doesn't come from resisting time, but from welcoming it, one careful step at a time. And now, as the mountain exhales and the dragon curls deeper into its sleep, we turn from this world of mist and myth to another mystery, one that lies not on the mountain, but deep beneath the sands. In the end, the terraces are more than fields. You drift downriver now, leaving behind the green-banded spine of the rice terraces and the mist-wrapped hush of Longji. In their place, you find the heat and dust and endless horizon of Egypt. The Nile is wide here, lazy, slow, its waters carrying the weight of centuries beneath a sky so bright it seems to hum. You find yourself standing, invisible and barefoot, in the reeds at the edge of an ancient village called Abu Rash, just close enough to Giza to feel the pulse of legend, but far enough to be overlooked by the curious and the camera toting. The pyramids are only distant silhouettes, sharp and geometric against the wavering light. Everyone else is gazing upwards, craning their necks for the perfect snapshot of stone and sky. But tonight, you are looking down. Beneath the silt, beneath water thick with memory, something stirs. Something massive. Something that refuses to be seen or forgotten. Local fishermen, those with sun-browned skin, and the slow, patient hands of men who have learned to trust the river's moods, have muttered about this for generations. You hear their voices, low and uncertain, as you drift along the shore. They speak of a shape just beneath the water's surface, a curve too steady for nature, a line too deliberate to be chance. At certain droughts, when the Nile shrinks and the mud pulls back like a tired curtain, there are whispers of stone emerging. Smooth, broad, feline. The kind of form that, once seen, rearranges your ideas of what is possible and what is mere river stone. You push aside the reeds, careful not to disturb the heron that watches you with one yellow, suspicious eye. The water is brackish, and still, thick with the scent of silt, and something older, maybe history itself, maybe just a hint of last week's catch, turned sideways in the sun. No tour buses idle here, their engines humming, promises of air conditioning and safe, sanitized wonder. No souvenir sellers hawk scarabs carved from plastic or chunks of rock, possibly chipped off someone's garden wall. Here, there is only the slosh of water, the gentle slap of a boat's hull, and the kind of silence that invites secrets to bloom. Rumor twists through the reeds like a cat. The villagers say that, long ago, A great statue was dragged here by flood or by fate, half buried by the Nile's shifting moods, then forgotten. Some claim to have seen it, a massive lion's body, weathered and pitted, its flanks worn not by wind, but by the slow, relentless caress of water and mud. There are stories of a carved face, so faded it is more suggestion than portrait, a mouth that might once have roared, now silenced by centuries of sediment. You crouch and peer into the murky shallows. The current is slow, swirling around something hard and unyielding. For a moment, the water clears, and you catch a glimpse, a stone curve, impossibly smooth, tracing a shape that feels both familiar and utterly alien. Was it carved? Or did water and time conspire to play tricks on eyes, eager for mystery? You can't tell. But the feeling in the air is unmistakable. A hush, a weight, as if the land itself is holding its breath. Modern explorers have come here too, drawn not by fame or fortune, but by curiosity that refuses to be satisfied. In the 1980s, a handful of researchers, armed with little more than leaky boats, cheap cameras, and a stubborn disregard for official maps, began to publish odd, grainy photos. They claimed to have seen a lion-bodied figure, half swallowed by silt, its paws reaching forward as if still guarding some ancient threshold beneath the water. Of course, the pictures were inconclusive. Most were dismissed as tricks of light and shadow, a convenient cluster of rocks, or perhaps a bit of wishful thinking, made tangible by the camera's fickle lens. Yet the seed of doubt had been planted. The story spread, first among amateur Egyptologists, then among those who prefer their history with a dash of conspiracy and a generous helping of the unknown. You can almost hear the heated debates, voices raised over coffee-stained maps, fingers stabbing at blurred photographs. One amateur, a self-proclaimed expert with a sunburned neck and a notebook full of contradictions, swears that he saw geometry where there should have been chaos, legs, symmetry, even the ghost of a mane. He described it all in feverish detail to anyone who will listen, his eyes shining with the conviction of someone who has glimpsed something that should not be. Official archaeologists, armed with years of training and a deep suspicion of anything that threatens the established order, respond with the measured patience of those who have heard it all before. Without careful excavation, without carbon dates or peer-reviewed stratigraphy, they insist a mystery is just a rock with good public relations. They remind you that Egypt's stones are shaped by more than just dreamers. Wind, water, and time are the true artists of this land. Nature, they argue, can sculpt wonders that rival the works of pharaohs and priests. But the evidence, such as it is, refuses to go away. Sonar scans, conducted in secret and sometimes in defiance of local authorities, reveal geometric patterns beneath the mud. Rectangular outlines, suspiciously regular, hint at foundations long hidden. The grooves and lines uncovered by drought seem too precise, too intentional. Satellite images, blurry but tantalizing, suggest blocks placed with purpose, not by accident. Each new finding is another thread in a tapestry that refuses to unravel. And then come the theorists, eager to weave stories where facts run thin. Authors and filmmakers, fringe historians and late-night radio hosts all leap into the fray. They whisper of lost civilizations, of a sphinx older than the pyramids, perhaps even older than memory itself. Some see echoes of Atlantis here, a relic swept inland by flood and myth. Others point to the water erosion on the Great Sphinx's enclosure, a pattern that suggests rain, heavy, sustained, ancient rain that has not visited the Giza Plateau since the world was young and the Sahara wore a crown of green. If the underwater Sphinx is real, if it was shaped by hands rather than happenstance, then it does more than challenge the timeline of Egypt. It threatens to rewrite the story of civilization itself. The mainstream chronology is clear. The Great Sphinx and its monumental neighbors rose from the sands around 2500 BCE during the reign of Pharaoh Khafre. But the underwater figure, if it truly exists and is as old as some claim, may have watched the Nile flood its banks when the Sahara was still a savanna, when herds of antelope grazed where now only sand and mirage remain. This is not just a question of dates and stones. It is a question of memory, and of what we choose to remember. If the underwater Sphinx predates the pyramids by millennia, then Egypt is not the cradle of pharaohs alone, but the heir to a forgotten age, a time when the river ran wild and the land itself was a different country. It would mean that our oldest stories are not old enough, and that beneath every layer of accepted fact, there is another, older story waiting to be told. Officialdom, naturally, is wary. No sanctioned excavation has ever been launched. No museum claims the site. The Sphinx, if that's what it is, remains unstudied, uncelebrated, and largely unmentioned in textbooks. Perhaps this is caution. Perhaps it is something else. The ground here is thick with secrets, and secrets are often safest when left undisturbed. Yet the mystery persists. The idea that something older than the pyramids could lie half buried in the mud is not just tantalizing, it is revolutionary. It invites you to imagine an Egypt, not of gold and hieroglyphs, but of mud and memory, when monuments are lost as easily as they are made, and where the greatest wonders hide just beneath the surface, waiting for drought or dreamer to reveal them. You stand on the muddy bank and consider the possibilities. Could an unknown people, nameless and unrecorded, have carved their legacy in stone, only to see it drowned and forgotten? Is it so impossible? After all, Göbekli Tepe in Turkey was built around 9600 BCE by people who had never seen writing or heard of pharaohs. There, too, are megaliths carved with animal shapes, pillars that predate Stonehenge by centuries. Why not here? Why not a sphinx, older than language, guarding the memory of a world that vanished beneath the waves? The underwater sphinx, if real, is more than a curiosity. It is a challenge, a silent rebuke to the neat boxes and tidy timelines of official history. It asks you to look again, to question what you have been told, to accept that some truths may be stranger and older than any myth. It is a puzzle wrapped in mud, a riddle spoken in the slow dialect of stone. For now, it waits. The Nile will rise and fall, the silt will cover and reveal, and the world will go on pretending that all the answers have already been found. But somewhere in the shallows, beneath the hush of reeds and the indifference of herons, a shape endures. It does not sleep, not really. It watches. It remembers. And perhaps, if you listen closely, you can almost hear it whispering, its voice half drowned but insistent, reminding you that history is never finished, only paused, only half revealed. So, as the sun settles low behind the pyramids, and the reeds shiver in a breeze heavy with old stories, you step back from the water's edge. You wonder what else lies waiting, what other secrets drift just out of sight beneath the surface of the known. And as night slides quietly over Abu Rash, the legend of the underwater sphinx follows you, a question you cannot quite leave behind. But this is only half the story. For just as you ready yourself to drift into another forgotten dream, another underwater enigma awaits, one that stares back even more defiantly from the silt. And in Egypt, as you are about to discover, stone doesn't lie, it remembers. Stone is not merely a bystander in the story of Egypt. It is a silent chronicler, a keeper of secrets beneath its weathered surface. Tonight, as you drift along the soft edges of sleep, imagine yourself kneeling at the banks near Abu Rash, fingertips brushing the gritty, stubborn mud. Here, at the site of the so-called underwater sphinx, the rock under your hand is not mute. It pulses with the memory of ancient water, of floods that have come and gone, of a landscape that once wore a greener, more unruly face. The desert is an illusion, a stage set over the ruins of a vanished marshland. If you listen, You can almost hear the gentle hush of water, a lullaby sung long before the pharaohs pressed their symbols into the annals of time. Geologists, those perennial detectives of the deep past, have gathered around this spot with their tools and their skepticism. They peer at photographs and samples from the Abu Rash site, and what they see unsettles the familiar script. There are grooves cut into the stone, smooth, rounded, and oddly purposeful. These are not the jagged scars of sandstorms or the slow etching of wind. No, these marks tell a different tale, one of rainfall, of flowing water, of a climate that has not rained here for thousands upon thousands of years. As you run your hand along these ancient channels, you might recall similar debates about the Great Sphinx itself, just a few miles downriver. There, too, the enclosure wall bears deep vertical fissures, not the work of the desert, but of water, heavy, relentless prehistoric rain that fell when Egypt was a tapestry of lakes and grass. At Abu Rash, the echoes of this watery past are even more mysterious. The so-called underwater Sphinx does not reveal itself easily. Most days, it sleeps beneath a shallow flood basin, shrouded by silt and the dull green of Nile mud. Only at times of low water, or when excavation efforts briefly part the curtain, do you see the shape emerge, a hunch that is unmistakably leonine. Shoulders that seem to brace against the centuries, a foundation too precise to be the work of idle nature. Researchers who have braved the muck report that the basin is a restless place, the ground thick with clay and haunted by the ghosts of ancient water tables, rising and falling with unpredictable violence. If you squint against the glare, you can see that the stone here is not worn in the careless way of chance. The weathering follows the lines of a sculpted form, as if the water and sediment have conspired to both reveal and conceal a monument. Sediment cores taken from around the site whisper of the early Holocene, when Egypt wore a crown of green and the Nile rampaged far beyond its modern banks. If anyone did carve a monument here, it could have brooded in the open for centuries, only to be swallowed by mud and forgotten, buried by the slow wandering of the river and the blind persistence of time. Here's where the story splits, and you must choose your guide. Skeptics, ever wary of mirages, say this is all a trick of the light, a natural rock outcrop, a coincidental symmetry, a story conjured by hopeful eyes and wishful thinking. After all, water is a powerful sculptor, but it does not favor geometry. It does not carve perfect pores or lay out foundations in neat, aligned rectangles. It certainly does not echo the unmistakable silhouette of a sphinx, just a few miles from Egypt's most famous guardian. So, you ask yourself, if water erased this monument from sight, what else has been lost beneath the Nile's shifting skin? More urgently, how much of history is still hidden, waiting for curious hands to unearth it? If the underwater Sphinx truly slumbers here, its pores and flanks worn smooth by ancient floods, why hasn't it been brought into daylight? Why does it remain a rumor, beneath layers of mud and silence, passed over by archaeologists, ignored by government ministries, left to the mercy of the currents and the cyclical moods of the Nile? The answer, like the artifact itself, is slippery, submerged beneath the surface of officialdom and bureaucracy. Egypt's archaeological authorities are nothing if not vigilant. Their protocols are legendary, their rules as rigid as the gaze of the Sphinx itself. Every trowel and brush must be sanctioned, every trench must be justified, every discovery weighed against the national narrative. To dig here, at a site that could challenge the comfortable timeline of Egypt's ancient past, you would need a mountain of permits, a river of funding, and an ocean of institutional approval. And that approval, as the wise and the weary know, rests on one unspoken commandment: do not rewrite Egypt's history without overwhelming, undeniable evidence. Thus, the underwater Sphinx has never felt the touch of a sanctioned excavation. Independent researchers, some with academic credentials, others with little more than enthusiasm and a stubborn streak, have crept around the edges, snapping photos, taking readings, whispering their findings to whichever audience will listen. But without the blessing of the state, their work floats in a grey limbo, anecdotal, suggestive, always just out of reach of certainty. There's another obstacle, as eternal as the Sphinx itself, the Nile. The river is a living thing, unpredictable and capricious, flooding and withdrawing in cycles that defy the neat lines of a dig. The site at Abu Rash is particularly fickle, often submerged for much of the year. To excavate it would mean draining the basin, redirecting water, shoring up fragile banks, and protecting whatever wildlife has claimed the site as its own over the centuries. Centuries of sediment bear down on whatever lies beneath, and even the boldest archaeologist must pause before attempting to peel back the layers without destroying the prize. And then, lurking just beneath the surface, are the politics. Imagine for a moment the uproar if a monument like this, potentially older than the pyramids, possibly predating the pharaohs themselves, were to be confirmed. Egypt's sense of itself is built upon its ancient glories, and its Ministry of Antiquities is understandably fond of discoveries that reinforce the established narrative. The prospect of rewriting the origin story of the Sphinx, of Egypt itself, is enough to give even the bravest bureaucrat a case of indigestion. The country's economy relies on the steady heartbeat of tourism, and the last thing anyone wants is a scandal over a monument that might muddy the waters, literally and figuratively. Some say in hushed tones that the authorities know more than they let on, that preliminary studies have been conducted in secret, deep within the echoing corridors of government offices, far from the eyes of the world. But in the absence of public records, peer-reviewed papers, or triumphant press releases, these claims sink into the murk of conspiracy. So the monument remains undisturbed, sleeping beneath its quilt of mud and skepticism, a prize for dreamers and a thorn in the side of the establishment. There is a certain irony here, one you can taste on the thick, salty air. In a country obsessed with guarding its ancient treasures, one of the greatest mysteries may be hiding in plain sight, unclaimed, unstudied, untouched by the official hand of history. But as every seasoned traveler knows, nothing stays buried forever. Ancient Egyptians believed that the Sphinx was more than stone. It was a guardian, a god, a riddle in flesh and bone. It wore the body of a lion, the head of a human, a symbol of strength guided by wisdom, of brute force tempered by royal thought. It stood at the threshold between the mortal and the divine, a cosmic sentinel whose gaze never wavered, even as empires crumbled and sandstorms raged. The most famous Sphinx, of course, is the one that presides over Giza, shoulders hunched against the winds of time, staring east toward the rebirth of the sun. 66 feet high, its face has watched 4,000 years unspool beneath it, its purpose still debated, its origin still shrouded in mystery. Some say the builder was Khafra. Some whisper of older hands, of faces recarved and meanings lost. But what if, just lean in for a moment, let the question tickle your imagination. What if there is another Sphinx, one older, battered by water, hidden in the mud at Abu Rash? What would it mean if Giza's guardian is not the first, but the inheritor of an even deeper tradition? No ancient text speaks of twin sphinxes at Giza, but the Greeks and Romans, arriving centuries later, wrote of guardians in pairs, of symmetry flanking sacred spaces. Egyptian temples, too, are obsessed with balance. Twin obelisks, twin avenues, pairs of lions carved to stand eternally in watchful silence. Why not twin sphinxes, guardians on either side of the threshold? Some researchers, emboldened by satellite scans and a taste for heresy, propose that the Abu Rash Sphinx is not a cheap imitation, but the original prototype, a relic from a forgotten culture, later copied and grandly reimagined at Giza. If this is true, it would mean the Sphinx is not a pharaonic invention at all, but a legacy from a vanished people, their myths adopted and polished by later kings. If the monument predates language and inscription, it may not fit into the pharaoh's neat boxes at all. Its purpose could be astronomical, ritual, a marker for a flood, or a monument to a forgotten god who stalked the horizon in the shape of a lion. And there is a reason the Sphinx wears a lion's body. In Egypt, lions guarded the horizon, the gates of dawn and dusk. A sphinx facing east is forever watching over the return of the sun. To carve such a creature was to freeze the moment of cosmic rebirth in stone. Now, imagine one carved before the age of pyramids, before the age of kings, placed here to guard a memory that even the Nile could not wash away. If such a monument exists, it would not just rewrite Egypt's history, it would change the way we understand its mythology. Egypt would no longer be the starting point of civilization, but the last echo of something more ancient, more mysterious. How appropriate, then, that this guardian might sleep beneath water, the ultimate symbol of lost worlds. As the legend of the underwater Sphinx ripples outward, a quiet but stubborn divide has formed. On one bank stands the old guard of Egyptology, cautious and methodical, wary of wild claims and eager to protect a fragile past. On the other, a ragtag band of independent researchers, amateur historians, and insomniac dreamers who believe that something extraordinary is being overlooked. Traditional scholars insist on evidence, stone inscriptions, radiocarbon dates, stratigraphic layers, the reassuring certainty of a peer-reviewed journal. They are not wrong to be careful. Egypt is a land of rocks that play tricks on the eye, of wind-carved shapes that look like monsters, gods, or lunch leftovers from a particularly uninspired pharaoh. The past is precious, and carelessness can turn discovery into disaster faster than you can say, "Hold my bread." But for the rebels, caution has morphed into complacency. Many of them are trained scientists, engineers, or just stubborn souls with a knack for seeing patterns where others see chaos. They point to satellite images showing symmetry, to LiDAR sweeps revealing rectangular foundations under the mud, to erosion patterns that look suspiciously deliberate. They also raise an eyebrow at the silence from official channels. After all, tourism is a delicate business, and a new Sphinx, especially one that upends the timeline, could throw the whole industry into a tizzy. The fear, they argue, is not of fraud, but of having to rewrite everything from textbooks to museum gift shop brochures. The debate has spilled out from dusty conference rooms into the wild world of books, documentaries, late-night podcasts, and conspiracy-laced YouTube comment sections. The underwater Sphinx has become a symbol, a rallying cry for those who crave hidden history, and a cautionary tale for those who fear the chaos of too much curiosity. The truth, as always, is buried somewhere in the silt, muddled by voices that are as thick and tangled as the Nile's own currents. This isn't just a battle of facts, it's a struggle for the soul of history. It asks you, yes, you, as you settle deeper into the folds of your imaginary linen bedding, how much you are willing to trust the official story. Will you follow only what has been confirmed, or are you willing to chase the whispers, the clues left just beyond reach? The underwater Sphinx is not just a rock, not just a relic. It is a riddle in stone, a litmus test for the boundaries of curiosity. As long as it remains entombed in mud and silence, both sides of the debate will continue to circle, arguing above a monument that refuses to answer, yet might change everything we think we know. And so, as the night deepens and the Nile's ghostly currents swirl around your dreams, you are left with more questions than answers. What sleeps beneath the mud at Abu Rash? What stories remain unspoken, uncarved, unwritten? And, most tantalizing of all, what would it mean to wake a guardian that even time has chosen to forget? Let yourself linger on that question as you drift, because as we move onward, the mystery only deepens. There's something haunting about a mystery buried in plain sight, especially when it wears the face of a lion and stares up from the mud with ancient silence. You find yourself standing at the edge of the Nile, the water lapping quietly at your sandals, the air heavy with the scent of mud, old stone, and something you can't quite name. In the distance, the silhouette of Giza's pyramids rises against the dawn. But tonight, your attention drifts somewhere stranger, beneath the surface, where a different kind of monument may be waiting. Here, it's not the proud gaze of a lion-bodied king that greets you, but the persistent rumor of a sphinx that doesn't bask in the sun, instead slumbering underwater, half swallowed by mud and myth. There's something irresistibly eerie about it, a mystery not hidden, but ignored, as if the world has agreed to look away. You wonder if the Sphinx is truly there, carved by hands older than history, or if it's nothing more than a trick of the river's silt, a face the water draws and erases with each season. Still, you feel its pull, the same way you can't help but glance back at a half-remembered dream. There's a longing here, a wish not just to uncover, but to reconnect, to reach back beyond the noise of modernity and recall something we were never told in the first place. Because when you stand in the presence of a ruin, even an unconfirmed one, you're forced to reckon with loss. The kind of loss that seeps into stone and sand, quietly erasing what was once beloved and known. Humanity has always lived with these ghosts. The ruins of cities, the silence of vanished tongues, the outlines of civilizations drowned beneath rivers, deserts, and the relentless march of time. And as you peer into the water, squinting for the flicker of a lion's face, you're really searching for a fragment of yourself. Who were we before the world became mapped and measured? How many stories have slipped away, washed downstream by progress, or buried under the weight of forgetting? If this sphinx beneath the water is genuine, if it was shaped by hands that predate even the oldest pyramid, then it's more than a curiosity. It becomes a message in a bottle, a voice from a time when the stars might have been charted differently, when the earth was honored in ways now lost to us, and when every stone carried a story we can barely imagine. There are those who whisper that this monument belongs to a civilization wiped out by catastrophe, a people whose knowledge vanished like a sandcastle at high tide. Most experts dismiss these ideas with a tired shake of the head, yet the ache remains. It isn't just the facts that grip us, it's the ache of possibility. To picture an ancient monument, carved before memory, then buried by floods and forgotten, is to stand face to face with the fragility of everything we build. Maybe that's why the legend refuses to die. The underwater sphinx is not just a relic, it's a reminder that history doesn't unfold in neat lines, and that even the hardest stone can melt away if the river is patient enough. And maybe, just maybe, that's what makes it so magnetic. This patch of river mud, this submerged question mark, reminds you that the world is still filled with secrets, secrets that have not yet been filed away, digitized, or analyzed into submission. In a world where every answer seems a Google search away, the underwater sphinx is stubbornly unresolved. It is a possibility, a mystery, a riddle that no drone has yet solved, no algorithm has yet processed into a neat paragraph for your textbook. Whether the sphinx is a trick of geology or a true relic, its power lies in the wondering. It makes you ask if the past is deeper than we dare believe, if myth sometimes preserves a truth that science has not yet caught up to. It invites you to lean closer, to listen for what might be breathing just beneath the surface, waiting for a curious ear. The underwater sphinx, whether sculpted by human hands or crafted by the river's slow patience, lies hidden, as it always has, under water, under mud, under centuries of quiet forgetting. It has no grand inscription, no spotlight, no tourist kiosk with laminated maps. Yet in its silence, it manages to speak, if only to those willing to listen for a whisper between stones. For every monument we've unearthed in Egypt, there are dozens more that remain buried, their stories trapped beneath shifting silt, lost to time or the whims of the Nile. Some are too delicate to touch, their secrets held tight by the earth. Others are simply overlooked, sitting in plain sight, ignored not out of irrelevance, but because their questions are inconvenient, their answers still too raw. And that, perhaps, is the true strength of the underwater Sphinx. It's not its grandeur or its age, but its stubborn refusal to be explained away. Its silence forces you to sit with uncertainty, to acknowledge the boundaries of knowledge, and to recognize how easy it is to overlook what matters most. Will it ever be fully revealed? Maybe not. The obstacles are as monumental as any ancient wall: politics, funding, tradition, and the inertia of the known. Yet its very obscurity turns it into a mirror, reflecting your own choices, what you choose to seek, what you decide to forget. It whispers that history remains alive, an unfinished puzzle scattered across the world, waiting for a new tide, a different question, or a restless night to bring it back to the surface. Perhaps one day the river will withdraw and the Sphinx will emerge, face clear and unmistakable. Or perhaps it will remain a legend, a story handed down, like a stone passed from palm to palm, its edges smoothed by time. But in the end, whether it's a monument or a mirage, the underwater Sphinx already performs its greatest magic. It makes you wonder. And in an age drowning in answers, the gift of a genuine mystery is rare indeed. Because maybe the oldest secrets are not just buried in mud or architecture, but in your own need to search, to remember, and to hope that somewhere beneath all that separates us from our beginnings, the past is still alive, still breathing, and still waiting for you to notice.